It started with a sentence no traveler wants to hear, especially not one who'd planned every detail months in advance. "I'm sorry, sir, but due to an equipment change, we've had to reassign your seat." The words were delivered with a tone polished to sound sympathetic but practiced enough to feel robotic. The agent didn't look up as she handed over the newly printed boarding pass. 32B middle seat, economy, a downgrade in every possible way. Colonel Thomas Callahan, 85 years old, glanced down at the flimsy slip of paper, then slowly looked back at the woman behind the counter. His original ticket, tucked neatly in the front pocket of his blazer, clearly read, "First class, seat 2A." It had been confirmed months ago. "There must be some mistake," he said quietly, his voice even, calm, polite, but unmistakably firm. This wasn't an entitled demand. It was a measured question from a man who had lived long enough to know the difference between fairness and convenience. The gate agent's response was a shrug. "Aircraft changes happen. 32B is your assigned seat now." That was it. No further explanation, no sign of empathy, just policy. Tom stood for a moment, holding both the original first-class ticket and the new economy slip in his weathered hands, his eyes narrowing slightly. Once those eyes had scanned dense jungles and enemy positions. Today they scanned a terminal full of people oblivious to what had just happened. There was no scene, no raised voice, just the subtle sag of a man's shoulders as he stepped aside, letting the next passenger approach the podium. It wasn't the seat, it was the principle. But he knew better than to expect understanding from someone who saw only a name on a screen, not the weight behind it. He found a seat near the edge of the crowded gate area, the kind of spot people avoid because it's next to a window with blinding glare. But Tom preferred it that way, quiet, isolated. The buzz of the terminal dulled to a background hum as he sat down slowly, his back aching more from the emotional sting than the physical pain. He settled into the chair, shoulders slightly hunched, hands resting on his lap. No one gave him a second glance, just another old man waiting for a flight, just another body in the churn of travel. If anyone had noticed, they might have seen a man dressed simply but neatly, pressed slacks, a collared shirt, and a sport coat that had clearly been cared for over the years. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just a quiet dignity that seemed out of place amid the chaos. They wouldn't have seen the copy of the Medal of Honor citation tucked away in his wallet, folded so many times the edges had started to fray. They wouldn't have known what he had done to earn it, how, during a firefight in Vietnam, he had exposed himself again and again to enemy fire to pull wounded comrades to safety, to rally a unit that was moments from being overrun. He never spoke of it, even when others brought it up. In his mind, that award belonged as much to the men he served with as it did to him. And now, with less than an hour before boarding, he sat watching strangers rush past, laughing, shouting into phones, dragging roller bags with a sense of urgency that didn't match the silence inside him. His seat, 2A, had represented more than just extra legroom. It was comfort, yes, but also care. His granddaughter Sarah, herself a captain in the army, had saved for months to make sure he'd travel with dignity. She'd booked the ticket using frequent flyer miles and every extra dollar she could spare, not because he asked, because she wanted to give back to the man who had given everything. That seat had been a symbol of love, thoughtfulness, and recognition. And now it was gone. Taken without so much as an apology. Tom didn't check his phone. He didn't post about it. He didn't approach the podium again. He had lived long enough to understand when a system was not built to listen. What hurt wasn't the inconvenience, it was the complete indifference. The idea that a man who had once been willing to die for his country could be so easily dismissed by a keystroke and a script. He looked down again at the new boarding pass, as if to be sure it was real. 32B middle seat, last rows of the aircraft, no recline, no comfort, no respect. He folded it once and slipped it into his wallet next to the citation. Then he sat back in his chair, stared out the window, and waited. Tom hadn't asked for the trip. In fact, when the invitation came from the Department of Defense, he had quietly considered turning it down. The ceremony at the White House was a national event, honoring recipients of the Medal of Honor, those few whose acts in combat had surpassed even the most harrowing standards of courage. Tom had never seen himself that way. In his mind, he'd simply done what had to be done. He didn't like the spotlight. He didn't care for recognition. But when he told Sarah about the invitation, her eyes lit up in a way he couldn't deny. "Grandpa, you have to go. You earned that. You deserve to be there." Sarah was his only granddaughter, and the only person who truly knew how much his service had cost him. Not just the visible things, aches, scars, fatigue, but the invisible ones too. The nightmares that still came in flashes, the funerals he'd stood at, the friendships left behind in faraway places. Sarah had grown up hearing the stories her parents wouldn't tell. She knew the man behind the uniform, and when she'd heard about the ceremony, she didn't hesitate. She went online that night and started piecing together a travel plan. No corners cut, no deals. She booked him a first-class seat, not out of luxury but out of necessity. Tom's back pain from a spinal injury in '69 made long flights almost unbearable. Economy seating was torture for a man whose body had been broken and pieced back together across decades. But it wasn't just the physical comfort that drove her. She wanted him to be treated with the respect he so rarely demanded for himself. She cashed in every mile she had and still came up short, so she dipped into her savings. She was saving for a car, maybe a house eventually. It didn't matter. "There'll be other cars," she'd said, "but there's only one you." She printed his itinerary herself, put it in a slim leather folder with everything organized. Confirmation codes, gate numbers, a schedule of the White House events, even a map of the airport terminals in DC. Then she'd handed him a small card with a handwritten number. "If something goes wrong, call this. It's the Heroes Liaison line for veterans. I made sure you're registered with them. You won't have to deal with the usual customer service stuff." Tom smiled and took the card, but he didn't think he'd need it. He arrived early the morning of the flight, navigating security with the quiet efficiency of someone used to checkpoints and lines. Every part of the process felt familiar and yet slightly exhausting. He was used to waiting, but he wasn't used to being invisible. He made his way to gate C12, checked the board, double-checked his ticket. Everything looked fine. The chaos of the airport swirled around him. Business travelers rushing to beat boarding times, families corralled around phone chargers, couples debating over overpriced sandwiches. He waited in the first-class boarding line, holding his neatly printed pass that read, Seat 2A, a window seat. Spacious. Quiet. He'd imagined himself sitting there, drifting off for a bit, saving his strength for the ceremony. When his turn came, he stepped forward and offered the pass to the gate agent, a woman named Brenda. She scanned it, frowned, and started typing quickly. "Just a moment, Colonel Callahan." Her tone was polite, clipped, professional, the kind of tone that carried a warning underneath. He waited, sensing something wasn't right. After a brief conversation with the younger agent beside her, she turned back to him. "I'm sorry, sir. Due to an aircraft change, your original seat is no longer available. You've been reassigned." He blinked, trying to absorb the sudden shift. Reassigned. She handed him the new slip of paper. 32B. "There are fewer first-class seats on the replacement aircraft," she continued, avoiding eye contact. "Priority was given to revenue passengers with Diamond Elite status. Your reservation was made with mileage points, so—" She let the implication hang in the air, unsaid but unmistakable. Tom stared at the new pass, the numbers not making sense at first. "I had a confirmed first-class seat," he said. "Booked months ago. I'm traveling to the White House for a formal event. It's not a vacation." His voice was calm but heavy with disappointment. "My granddaughter went to great lengths to make sure I'd travel comfortably. I have documented back injuries from service. This isn't about preference, it's about health." Brenda gave a small sigh and glanced around as if looking for support. "Sir, our system prioritizes based on fare class and loyalty status. Unfortunately, military honors don't affect seat assignment in this context." Tom raised his eyebrows slightly. "Even the Medal of Honor?" She flinched, just barely. "Our policies don't distinguish beyond standard TSA protocols." It wasn't just what she said. It was the way she said it. Flat. Cold. As if she were reciting terms and conditions rather than speaking to someone who had risked his life for her, right to even be standing behind that counter. Tom knew futility when he saw it. He had nothing to gain by arguing with someone who had already made up her mind and hidden behind a policy wall. "I see," he said quietly. He folded the paper once, twice, slipping it into his wallet without another word. Then he stepped aside, as another passenger, chatting on a Bluetooth headset, boarding pass in hand, breezed past him laughing about club access. Tom took a seat near the window, again unnoticed by the crowd. A man displaced not just by an airline system, but by a culture that seemed to have forgotten the quiet weight of true service. Tom sat still for a long while, staring out the wide terminal windows as the buzz of the airport swirled around him like white noise. He wasn't angry, not in the way younger men might flare up at inconvenience. But there was a particular kind of disappointment that settled deep in his chest. Not the kind that passes quickly, but the kind that stays with you, quietly reinforcing what you already feared to be true. That time, distance, and indifference can wear away even the most sacred things. He wasn't thinking about the seat anymore. Not really. He was thinking about how easy it was to forget, how fast the world moved on, how someone's greatest sacrifices could become nothing more than a record on a boarding manifest, dismissed in a single keystroke. His back ached from the cheap waiting area chair. Not that he would complain, but the pain reminded him why this trip had been planned so carefully. Sarah had thought of everything. She'd told him the ticket had been upgraded with love. She'd even gone as far as to give him the direct number to TransGlobal's Heroes Liaison service. "You probably won't need it, Grandpa," she'd said with a wink. "But if anything gets weird, call them. It's supposed to bypass the regular system. They're trained to handle veteran travel issues." He remembered laughing when she said that. "If something gets weird," he'd repeated, teasing her. "I survived 3 tours. I think I can handle weird." But now, sitting at gate C12 with a boarding pass that might as well have been a reminder of how little his past was worth to a customer service algorithm, he reached into his wallet. The card was still there, tucked behind his license and that folded, worn copy of his citation. A plain card with a handwritten number and the words Heroes Liaison, priority line scrawled in neat ink. He hesitated. It wasn't pride holding him back. Tom Callahan had never been too proud to ask for help, but rather the gnawing suspicion that it might not matter, that even a special number might lead to the same hollow apologies and cold procedures. But Sarah had believed in it, and he trusted Sarah. So he dialed. The phone rang once, then again, and on the second ring, someone answered. "This is David with TransGlobal Heroes Liaison. How can I assist you today, sir?" Tom was caught slightly off guard. No automated prompts, no endless menus. A human voice, steady, professional, and most surprising of all, sincere. "Yes, my name is Colonel Thomas Callahan. I'm scheduled to be on Flight 714 to Washington, D.C. I had a confirmed first-class seat. I was downgraded at the gate to a middle seat in the back. I'm traveling for an official ceremony. White House, Medal of Honor recipients. The gate agent said an equipment change reduced the number of premium seats. She said my miles-based booking put me lower on the list." He stopped there. No embellishment, no anger, just the facts. Years of military service had trained him to deliver critical information clearly and without drama. There was a pause, then the sound of keys being typed rapidly on the other end of the line. "Understood, Colonel Callahan. Please confirm your reservation number and current gate." Tom read the information aloud. The line went quiet again, except for the subtle clicking of a keyboard. He sat forward slightly, unsure what to expect, unsure if this would be the moment the conversation took a turn toward the usual platitudes, but then the voice returned. "Colonel, thank you for your patience. I see your booking. I also see the downgrade and the notation. Please accept my sincere apology. What you've described is absolutely not how our Heroes Liaison program is intended to function. This is not acceptable, not on any level. Your case is being escalated to our executive response team immediately. I need you to remain at gate C12. Someone will be coming to speak with you directly. Very shortly." Tom blinked. He hadn't expected that. "Escalated to the executive team?" he asked, a trace of doubt in his tone. "Yes, sir. This is being handled at the highest level. Please stay exactly where you are. I assure you, Colonel, we are correcting this right now." The call ended. Tom sat in silence for a moment, staring at the phone in his hand, still uncertain whether he should believe what he had just heard. It all sounded promising, but years of experience had taught him that promises don't always equal results. He'd seen his share of "we'll take care of it" responses dissolve into nothing but apologies sent via email after the damage had already been done. For all he knew, the call had been a well-trained operator reading a prepared script, one meant to soothe rather than solve. Still, there had been something different in David's voice, a sharpness, a determination, something that sounded less like sympathy and more like authority. So Tom waited. The gate continued to buzz with the usual airport energy, announcements over the PA, families negotiating snacks, phones buzzing with notifications. None of them knew that somewhere behind the scenes, a conversation had begun that would soon send shockwaves through the entire airline. He didn't know it either, not yet, but in exactly 8 minutes, that quiet phone call would reach the top floor of a glass-walled office, and the man who sat behind that desk, the one whose name appeared on every apology letter TransGlobal had ever sent, would rise from his leather chair in a panic, bark out an order to his assistant, and begin a sprint through the terminal that no CEO had ever made before. At exactly 8 minutes after he ended the call, Tom was still sitting quietly at the edge of Gate C12, staring out at the tarmac, lost in thought. Around him, the slow chaos of boarding had begun. Group 1 was being called. First class, military and priority passengers. A few people stood up, clutching boarding passes, maneuvering around rolling bags, half listening to overhead announcements. None of them noticed the sudden change in energy a few dozen feet away at the far end of the concourse. It began not with a public address or a warning bell, but with movement, fast, focused, unmistakably urgent. Heads began to turn. Airline employees stepped aside. A small group of people in suits, led by a tall, red-faced man who looked far too important to be running, pushed through the crowd with a kind of authority that didn't require a uniform. Their pace was brisk, determined, coordinated. No one tried to stop them. People just watched them go. At the front of the pack, Edward Sterling, president and CEO of TransGlobal Airlines, moved with a mixture of desperation and precision. He looked like a man who'd just been handed a live grenade and told he had less than 10 minutes to defuse it. Behind him, his chief operating officer and vice president of customer experience struggled to keep up, along with an assistant juggling 2 phones and speaking rapidly into an earpiece. Sterling didn't even glance at the passengers he passed. He had one question, and he repeated it like a command. "Where is he?" By the time they reached Gate C12, the gate agents were already halfway through boarding. Brenda was back at the podium, casually scanning tickets again, her professional smile restored, her earlier interaction with Tom forgotten as just another minor inconvenience in a long day of minor inconveniences. She didn't notice the team approaching until they were standing directly in front of her. Sterling stopped short, trying to catch his breath. His suit jacket flapped open, and sweat had begun to bead at his collar. "Where is Colonel Thomas Callahan?" His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the ambient noise like a knife. Brenda blinked, confused for half a second. Then her eyes widened. It took her a moment to process who was standing in front of her. She looked past him at the other executives, people she'd only seen on internal emails and mandatory training videos, and her mouth went dry. She raised a hand and pointed shakily toward the far window. "He's right there, seated by the wall." Sterling didn't say thank you. He didn't wait. He turned and moved toward the window, slowing only when he was a few feet away. Tom hadn't seen them coming. He was still in his chair, arms folded loosely across his chest, his boarding pass untouched in the pocket of his jacket. He looked up as the group approached, slightly puzzled by the flurry of movement in his direction. Sterling stopped, composed himself with visible effort, then stepped forward. "Colonel Callahan," he said, extending a hand. "My name is Edward Sterling. I'm the president of TransGlobal Airlines." Tom stared up at him for a beat, then slowly stood, surprised but composed. "Mr. Sterling, he said, offering a polite nod. Sterling's voice lowered. Colonel, I've just been made aware of your experience at this gate. I cannot express how deeply sorry I am. The downgrade, the lack of assistance, the way our staff handled your situation, it's unacceptable, completely unacceptable. I came here personally because this shouldn't have happened. Not to anyone, especially not to you. Tom said nothing at first. He studied the man carefully. There was no stiffness in his eyes, no performance, just raw urgency, maybe even guilt. Sterling continued. The equipment change was real, yes, but the process that followed, the way your seat was reassigned, the way your concerns were dismissed, that was not in line with our standards or our values. We failed you, Colonel, and I came here to make that right, personally. Behind Sterling, the VP of Customer Experience was already whispering furiously into a radio, giving orders. The COO was flipping through a printout of the manifest. The assistant was confirming details on a tablet. This wasn't a gesture. This was a response in motion. We're holding the aircraft, Sterling said. You will not be flying in 32B. We're arranging for your original seat to be reinstated, or if necessary for another passenger to step aside. I'm prepared to give up my own seat if it comes to that. You are going to DC in comfort and with the respect you've more than earned. Tom glanced down at the carpeted floor, shook his head slowly, then looked back up. It wasn't the seat, he said. It was the way it was handled, the indifference. That's what hurt. Sterling nodded, jaw tight. I know, and I agree. That's where the failure began. We're implementing immediate corrective action. Your trip today and any future travel you or your family take with our airline will be at no cost, lifetime first class. But more than that, we're changing how we respond to situations involving distinguished veterans like yourself. There will be a policy, a protocol, starting now. He paused. Colonel, I'm truly sorry, and I'm grateful for the chance to apologize to you in person. Tom studied him for a long moment, then offered his hand. I appreciate you coming down here. That means something. Sterling clasped his hand firmly, then turned to his team. Make sure the colonel is boarded personally. Seat 1A, nothing less. Then coordinate with ops. I want this protocol written by the end of the day. Brenda watched from the podium, her posture stiff, her face pale. She hadn't been mentioned by name, but she understood the implications. The Vice President of Customer Experience walked briskly toward her, quietly instructing her to step aside. Mark, the younger agent who had looked uneasy earlier, was brought forward. Sterling turned back to Tom. Is there anything I can get for you right now? Coffee, water, anything? Tom smiled faintly. Just make sure I'm on that plane, Mr. Sterling. The rest can wait. You'll be there, sir, Sterling replied, voice resolute. With honors. The gate announcement came again, but this time with a very different tone. Final boarding call for Flight 714 to Washington, D.C. The passengers still waiting to board barely noticed the quiet commotion happening to the side, how a well-dressed older man was now being escorted personally down the jet bridge by two senior airline officials, one on either side of him, as if walking a dignitary to a private audience. It was not done with fanfare. There were no cameras, no speeches, just quiet, respectful motion and the unspoken acknowledgement of a mistake being corrected in real time. Seat 1A had been vacated voluntarily by a passenger who, once informed of the situation, gave up his place without hesitation. I'd be proud to step aside for the colonel, the man had said. That was the ripple effect of real respect. It didn't have to be demanded. It inspired others to do the right thing without being told. And so, with little fuss and quiet dignity, Colonel Thomas Callahan stepped into the first-class cabin, where his original seat had been replaced by an even better one. A flight attendant greeted him by name, offered to hang his coat, and asked if he needed anything at all before takeoff. The rest of the cabin, now fully aware of who he was and what had happened, offered subtle nods of recognition as he passed. No applause, no awkward stares. Just a corridor of acknowledgement from strangers who understood at last the weight of the moment. As he settled into 1A, a spacious window seat with more room than he'd need, Tom felt something shift. not just in his body but in the air around him. The fatigue was still there, the long day still pressed into his bones, but the insult, the sting of being dismissed, had been replaced with something else. Not pride, not satisfaction, just relief. Quiet, profound relief. That, for once, someone in power had acted without delay, without deflection, and with full accountability. The flight took off 10 minutes behind schedule, but no one complained. The pilot even made a quiet announcement mid-air, thanking the passengers for their patience and for showing grace in a situation that deserved it. No names were mentioned. None were needed. Everyone on that plane understood. Back at headquarters, emails were already being drafted. Memos circulated. A new policy was being written under the heading Callahan Protocol. It mandated immediate top-level response for any issue involving Medal of Honor recipients or veterans traveling on official business. Gate agents across the country would be retrained. Supervisors briefed. The mistake made at Gate C-12 would never be repeated, not just because of embarrassment, but because the president of the company had witnessed firsthand the cost of failing to recognize quiet heroism. Brenda, the gate agent, was reassigned to a non-customer-facing position pending retraining. Her name wouldn't be listed in the internal report, but her actions had triggered a chain reaction the company would remember for years. Mark, her colleague, was later commended in private for showing discomfort at the decision and for submitting a follow-up report once the chaos had cleared. He hadn't spoken up in the moment, but he had recognized the failure. That, too, mattered. By the time Tom's flight landed at Dulles, the story had already begun circulating in military circles. Word spread fast, across social media, across veteran groups, across forums and family chats. The airline had made a mistake, yes, but they had owned it, publicly, completely. And that mattered even more than the mistake itself. For once, someone had run toward accountability instead of hiding behind policy. Tom arrived at the hotel late that night, tired but composed. The uniform he'd packed for the ceremony hung neatly in the garment bag beside him. He hadn't told Sarah what had happened. He didn't want to worry her. She'd done so much to make the trip possible. He wouldn't let the frustration of a gate agent stain that gift. But Sarah, as always, found out. A fellow officer in her unit had seen the story shared by a veterans group online. She called her grandfather as soon as she read it. "Grandpa," she said, her voice laced with concern. "I heard something happened with your flight. Are you okay?" Tom paused, then chuckled softly. "Just a little turbulence at the gate, sweetheart. Nothing a few good people couldn't smooth out." She didn't press. She knew him too well to expect more details than that. But she also knew what that meant. Something had gone wrong, deeply wrong, and someone had made it right. Tom stood before the White House the next morning, dressed in his formal attire, his Medal of Honor resting on his chest. As he waited to be called forward among the other recipients, he looked out over the trimmed lawns and marble steps and thought about how fragile dignity could be in a world that often moved too fast to notice it. But he also thought about how sometimes all it took was one voice at the right time, one act of leadership, one phone call, placed not out of outrage, but out of quiet resolve, to remind people what honor still looks like. Because respect isn't earned in algorithms, it isn't measured by loyalty tiers or upgrade status, it's shown in moments of truth when the world either looks away or steps up. And on that day, at Gate C-12, it had chosen to step up.